The bullet grazed her arm as she threw herself in front of the sobbing child. And in that instant, Millicent Graham knew her mother had been wrong about kindness being a death sentence in this unforgiving land. The year was 1872, and Abilene, Texas had seen its share of gunfire, but this particular afternoon in late September would change everything Millicent thought she knew about strength and survival. She had been working at the general store for 3 years now, ever since she arrived from Philadelphia at 18, fleeing a life of rigid expectations and loveless arrangements her parents had orchestrated. Now 21, she had built something of a life here, though the townspeople often whispered that she was too soft, too gentle, too willing to extend credit to families who could not pay, too quick to offer food to drifters who wandered through town looking hungry and desperate. The child in her arms could not have been more than 5 years old, a little boy who had wandered into the crossfire between 2 drunk cowboys, arguing over a card game gone wrong. Blood seeped through the sleeve of Millicent's pale blue dress, but she did not release the child, instead crawling behind a water trough while bullets continued to ping off the wooden storefront. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady as she whispered soothing words to the terrified boy, stroking his dark hair and promising him that everything would be all right. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun. One cowboy lay dead in the street, the other had fled on horseback, and the town marshal was shouting orders to form a posse. Millicent stood on shaking legs, the child still clinging to her skirts, and that was when she saw him. He stood at least 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and his face was weathered and tanned from years in the mountains. Muscles rippled beneath his buckskin shirt as he dismounted from a massive roan horse, and his eyes swept the scene with the careful assessment of a man who had seen violence before and knew how to handle it. Isaac Palmer had come down from the mountains for supplies, as he did twice a year when the weather permitted. He had been about to enter the general store when the shooting started, and he had watched the young woman throw herself in front of the child without a moment's hesitation. Most people in his experience looked out for themselves first and foremost. This woman had done the opposite, and it stirred something in his chest that he had not felt in his 30 years of life. He approached her slowly, noting the blood on her sleeve and the pale cast to her face. "You are hurt," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. "That needs tending." Millicent looked up at him, her green eyes wide but not frightened. "The child is unharmed. That is what matters." "The child's mother is running this way," Isaac observed, nodding toward a woman in a faded calico dress who was rushing toward them with tears streaming down her face. "But you are still bleeding." The mother swept her son into her arms, sobbing her thanks to Millicent, who waved away the gratitude as though it were nothing at all. Isaac watched her sway slightly on her feet and made a decision. Without asking permission, he scooped her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all, which to him she might as well have. Millicent gasped in surprise, her hands automatically reaching for his shoulders to steady herself. "Put me down," she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "I can walk perfectly well." "You are about to faint," Isaac said matter-of-factly. "Where is the doctor?" "2 streets over, but I do not need where." His tone left no room for argument. Millicent sighed and pointed. "The white building with the green shutters." Isaac carried her through the dusty streets of Abilene, drawing stares from every direction. Millicent felt her face flame with embarrassment, but she also felt something else, something she could not quite name. This stranger's arms were solid and sure, and despite the impropriety of being carried through town like a helpless damsel, She felt safer than she had in years. Dr. Matthews was a gruff man in his 50s who had seen everything the frontier had to offer. He took one look at Millicent in the mountain man's arms and gestured toward the examining table. "Set her down there." "What happened?" Isaac explained while the doctor cut away the blood-soaked sleeve of Millicent's dress. The bullet had carved a shallow groove along the outside of her upper arm, painful but not dangerous. Dr. Matthews cleaned and bandaged the wound while Millicent sat silent and still, her jaw set against the pain. "You were lucky," the doctor said. "An inch to the right, and this would be a different conversation. What were you thinking, throwing yourself in front of that child?" "I was thinking he might die," Millicent said simply. The doctor shook his head. "Your kindness is going to get you killed one of these days, Miss Graham. This town is too rough for someone with your temperament." Isaac had been standing by the door, but at these words he turned. "Her kindness saved a child's life today. That seems like strength, not weakness." Both Millicent and the doctor looked at him in surprise. Isaac met Millicent's gaze and held it, and something passed between them in that moment, something electric and undeniable. Dr. Matthews finished bandaging the wound and accepted payment from Isaac before Millicent could protest. "Keep it clean and dry," he instructed. "Come back in a week so I can check on it." Outside the doctor's office, Millicent finally found her voice. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Palmer, Isaac Palmer. I am Millicent Graham. I work at the general store." She paused, then added, "I can repay you for the doctor's fee." "No need." Isaac studied her face, taking in the delicate features, the determined set of her chin, the kindness that seemed to radiate from her very being. He had lived alone in the mountains for 8 years now, ever since his parents died in a cholera outbreak. He preferred solitude to the complications of town life, preferred the company of pine trees and elk to people. But looking at this woman, he felt the first stirrings of something he had thought long dead. "You should rest," he said. "Do you have someone to look after you?" "I live above the general store. I will be fine on my own." Isaac frowned. "You should not be alone after such a shock." "I have been alone for 3 years, Mr. Palmer. I am quite accustomed to it." There was something in her voice that spoke of loneliness carefully hidden, and Isaac recognized it because he had heard the same tone in his own voice on the rare occasions he spoke to anyone. "I need to purchase supplies," he said. "I will walk you back to the store." They walked side by side through the dusty streets, and Millicent found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her. He moved with the quiet confidence of a predator, and yet she felt no fear of him. If anything, she felt protected, as though nothing bad could happen while he was near. The general store was run by Mr. Hutchins, a portly man who had given Millicent a job when she first arrived in Abilene with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination to build a new life. He fussed over her injury and insisted she go upstairs to rest, but Millicent shook her head. "I can still work," she said. "Mr. Palmer needs supplies." For the next hour, Millicent helped Isaac gather what he needed: flour, salt, coffee, sugar, ammunition, a new knife, and various other items. He watched her work with quiet efficiency despite her injury, noting the way she smiled at every customer who entered, the way she gave an extra piece of candy to a little girl who came in with her father, the way she carefully wrapped each item as though it were precious. When everything was packed and loaded onto his horse, Isaac found himself reluctant to leave. "How long before your arm heals?" he asked. Dr. Matthews said a few weeks, though the bandage can come off sooner if it heals cleanly. Isaac nodded slowly. "I will be in town for 2 more days. If you need anything, I am staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street. Millicent felt her heart skip a beat. "Thank you, but I am sure I will manage." He tipped his hat to her and mounted his horse, and Millicent watched him ride away with an odd sense of loss. She told herself she was being ridiculous. He was a stranger, a mountain man who lived in isolation and would disappear back to wherever he came from in 2 days. There was no reason for her heart to ache as it did. That night, alone in her small room above the general store, Millicent lay awake thinking about Isaac Palmer. His words echoed in her mind. Her kindness was strength, he had said. No one had ever told her that before. Her mother had warned her repeatedly that kindness would be exploited, that people would take advantage of her soft heart, that she needed to harden herself if she wanted to survive. Her father had agreed, insisting that practical considerations mattered more than sentiment, which was why they had arranged her engagement to a wealthy merchant twice her age. Millicent had fled rather than marry a man she did not love, had chosen poverty and uncertainty over a comfortable life without affection. In Abilene, she had tried to help where she could, even when people warned her against it. She extended credit to families struggling through hard times, even though Mr. Hutchins grumbled about it. She bandaged the wounds of drifters who stumbled into town hurt and hungry, even though the marshal told her they would rob her blind given half a chance. She taught reading to children whose parents could not afford a schoolteacher, even though some folks said she was putting ideas into heads that should stay empty. And everyone, from the banker to the preacher, had told her the same thing. Her kindness was a weakness that would be her undoing. But Isaac Palmer had looked at her with those storm-gray eyes and said the opposite. He had called it strength, and something in her soul had recognized the truth of his words. The next morning, Millicent rose early despite the throbbing pain in her arm. She dressed carefully in a green calico dress that brought out her eyes and pinned her auburn hair into a neat bun. She told herself she was not hoping to see Isaac Palmer again, but when she descended the stairs to open the store, her eyes immediately went to the window, searching the street outside. The morning passed slowly. Customers came and went, and Millicent served them all with her usual cheerful demeanor, though her thoughts kept drifting to the mountain man. It was nearly noon when the door opened and Isaac walked in, ducking his head to clear the door frame. "Good morning," Millicent said, hoping her voice sounded casual. "Did you forget something yesterday?" "No." Isaac approached the counter, his hat in his hands. "I came to see how you are feeling." Warmth spread through Millicent's chest. "That is very kind of you. My arm is sore, but I will heal." "Good." Isaac fell silent and Millicent waited, sensing he had more to say. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might have dinner with me tonight. There is a restaurant on Main Street that serves decent food." Millicent's breath caught. She had been asked to dinner before by various men in Abilene, but she had always declined. Sensing they wanted something from her she was not willing to give. But Isaac's invitation felt different, genuine, and she found herself nodding before she had fully thought it through. "I would like that very much." Relief flickered across Isaac's rugged features. "I will call for you at 6 o'clock if that suits you." "It does." After he left, Mr. Hutchins emerged from the back room with a knowing smile. "That is Isaac Palmer," he said. "He comes down from the mountains twice a year, regular as clockwork. Keeps to himself mostly. Never seen him ask a woman to dinner before." Millicent felt her cheeks warm. "It is just a meal." "If you say so, Miss Graham, if you say so." The afternoon dragged interminably. Millicent found herself watching the clock, counting down the hours until 6. When 5 o'clock finally arrived, she closed the store and hurried upstairs to change. She owned 3 good dresses, and she chose the nicest one, a deep blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. She let her hair down and then pinned it up again 3 different ways before settling on a simple style that framed her face. Isaac arrived precisely at 6, wearing clean trousers and a white shirt that strained slightly across his massive shoulders. His hair was still damp from washing, and he smelled of soap and pine. He offered her his arm, and they walked together to the restaurant, a small establishment called Martha's Kitchen that served home-cooked meals to travelers and locals alike. Over plates of roast beef, potatoes, and vegetables, they talked. Millicent told him about Philadelphia, about her family's expectations and her desperate flight west. She told him about the 3 years she had spent in Abilene, about the friends she had made and the life she had built. She spoke of her dreams to one day own her own business, perhaps a boarding house or a small hotel where travelers could find comfort and kindness. Isaac listened with an intensity that made her feel truly heard, perhaps for the first time in her life. When she finally fell silent, embarrassed by how much she had revealed, he began to speak of his own story. He had been born in Missouri, he told her, the only child of farmers who had worked hard but never prospered. When he was 22, cholera had swept through their settlement, taking both his parents within days of each other. Grief-stricken and alone, Isaac had sold the farm and headed west, eventually settling in the mountains of northern Texas where he built a cabin and learned to live off the land. "I thought I wanted solitude," he said, his deep voice quiet. "I thought people brought nothing but pain. For 8 years I have lived alone and I convinced myself I was content." "And now," Millicent asked softly. Isaac met her gaze. "Now I am not so sure." The air between them seemed to crackle with possibility. Millicent's heart raced, and she found herself leaning forward, drawn to this man who saw her as she truly was, who valued what others called weakness. After dinner, Isaac walked her back to the general store. The September night was warm and stars sparkled overhead in the vast Texas sky. They stood outside the store's entrance, neither wanting to say goodbye. "I leave tomorrow," Isaac said finally. "I need to get back before the weather turns." Disappointment crashed over Millicent like a wave. "Of course, the mountains must be beautiful this time of year." "They are." Isaac hesitated, then reached out and gently took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and Millicent felt tremors run up her arm at his touch. "Come with me." Millicent stared at him in shock. "What?" "Come with me to the mountains. I know it is sudden, and I know I have no right to ask, but I have never met anyone like you, Millicent Graham. These past 2 days, you have made me feel things I thought I had buried. You have reminded me that loneliness is not the same as peace." "Isaac, I barely know you, I know. And I am not asking you to marry me or make any promises. I am asking you to take a chance to come and see if what I feel might be something you feel too." Millicent's mind raced. This was madness, absolute madness. She had a job, a life, responsibilities. She could not simply run off into the mountains with a man she had known for less than 2 days. And yet, looking into his eyes, she saw something that called to the deepest part of her soul. She saw honesty and hope and a longing that matched her own. "I need time to think," she whispered. "Of course." Isaac released her hand, though she could see the disappointment in his face. "I will come by tomorrow morning before I leave. Whatever you decide, I will respect it." That night, Millicent did not sleep at all. She paced her small room, weighing the decision before her. If she went with Isaac, she would be leaving behind the only security she had known since fleeing Philadelphia. She would be trusting a man she barely knew, venturing into the wilderness with no guarantee of what she would find there. It was dangerous and impulsive and completely unlike her usual careful nature. But what was her usual careful nature earning her? A small room, a modest income, and the constant criticism of people who thought kindness was foolishness. She had run from one cage in Philadelphia only to build another, more subtle one here in Abilene. As dawn broke over the town, Millicent made her decision. She packed her few belongings into a traveling bag, including the small amount of money she had saved over 3 years. She wrote a letter to Mr. Hutchins, thanking him for his kindness and apologizing for the short notice. Then she sat down to wait. Isaac arrived at 8 o'clock, leading his roan horse and a smaller mare. When he saw the bag at Millicent's feet, his face lit up with such joy that she knew she had made the right choice. "You will come. I will come." Isaac pulled her into his arms, and Millicent found herself crushed against his broad chest. She could feel the rapid beating of his heart, could smell the clean scent of him, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, holding tight. They left Abilene within the hour, riding north toward the mountains. Millicent had never been much of a rider, but the mare Isaac had brought for her was gentle and patient. They traveled through rolling grasslands that gradually gave way to rocky terrain and stands of pine. Isaac kept them to a steady but not punishing pace, frequently checking to make sure Millicent was managing. The first night, they camped beneath a canopy of stars so vast and bright that Millicent felt as though she could reach up and touch them. Isaac built a fire and cooked a simple meal of beans and bacon, and they sat together on his bedroll, shoulders touching, talking long into the night. "Are you frightened?" Isaac asked at one point. Millicent considered the question. "No," she said finally. "I should be, but I am not. I feel as though I am finally moving towards something instead of running away." Isaac took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I will take care of you, Millicent. I promise you that. I believe you." They traveled for 3 more days, climbing higher into the mountains with each passing hour. The air grew cooler and thinner, scented with pine and clean earth. Millicent saw deer and wild turkeys, heard the cry of hawks overhead, and felt something inside her begin to unfurl, like a flower opening to the sun. On the 4th day, they arrived at Isaac's cabin. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a stream running nearby that sang over smooth stones. The cabin itself was larger than Millicent had expected, built from sturdy logs with a stone chimney and glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport into the mountains. Inside, she found a single large room with a fireplace at one end, a bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs and various supplies neatly organized on shelves. It was simple but clean, and through the windows, the view of the mountains was breathtaking. "It is not much," Isaac said, suddenly uncertain, "but it is solid and warm, and it is wonderful," Millicent interrupted, turning to face him. "Truly." Relief washed over his face. "I built a separate room on the back last year. I will sleep there and you can have the main room. I want you to feel safe here." Millicent felt tears prick her eyes at his consideration. "Thank you." Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine. Isaac taught Millicent how to fish in the stream, how to identify edible plants, how to read the signs of changing weather in the clouds. She proved to be a quick learner, and her kindness extended to the animals they encountered. She nursed an injured rabbit back to health, fed the jays that came to the cabin's porch, and spoke gently to the horses as she cared for them. Isaac found himself falling more deeply in love with her each day. He loved the way she hummed while cooking, the way she found beauty in everything from a perfect pine cone to the frost patterns on the windows in the morning. He loved her laughter, bright and genuine, and the way she listened when he spoke, truly listened as though his words mattered. For Millicent, the mountains became a revelation. She had never known such peace, such freedom. There were no judgmental eyes here, no voices telling her she was too soft, too foolish, too kind. There was only Isaac, who looked at her as though she hung the moon and the vast wilderness that asked nothing of her but her presence. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Millicent found the courage to voice something that had been growing in her heart. "Isaac, I need to tell you something." He set down the piece of wood he had been whittling and gave her his full attention. "What is it?" "I am in love with you." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know we agreed I would just visit, that there were no promises, but I cannot help how I feel. These weeks with you have been the happiest of my life, and I do not want them to end." Isaac was on his feet in an instant, crossing the space between them. He knelt before her chair and took both her hands in his. "Millicent Graham, I have loved you since the moment I saw you throw yourself in front of that child. I have loved you every minute of every day since then, and I will love you for the rest of my life if you will let me." Tears streamed down Millicent's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will let you." Isaac pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Millicent felt the last walls around her heart crumble to dust. His lips were gentle despite his strength, and she kissed him back with all the passion she had kept locked away for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "We can go to the nearest town with a preacher, make it official. I want you to be my wife, to build a life with you here in these mountains." "Yes," Millicent said again, laughing through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They traveled to a small settlement 2 days' ride away, where a circuit preacher was making his monthly rounds. They were married in a tiny church with wildflowers Millicent had gathered decorating the altar, and the settlement's few residents standing as witnesses. Millicent wore her blue dress, and Isaac wore his cleanest clothes, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance sighed audibly. That night, in the cabin that was now truly their home, Isaac carried Millicent over the threshold. He had moved his things into the main room while they were away, and the bed in the corner had been spread with fresh linens and a beautiful quilt he had traded for years ago. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his large hands. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I will wait as long as you need." "I am certain," Millicent said, reaching up to undo the buttons of his shirt. "I am your wife, and I want to be your wife in every way." What followed was tender and passionate. Isaac taking his time to learn every inch of his wife's body, determined to bring her nothing but pleasure. Millicent had been nervous, but Isaac's gentleness and the love she saw in his eyes made the nervousness fade, replaced by a desire so intense it took her breath away. They came together with whispered words of love, and afterward, Millicent lay cradled in Isaac's strong arms, feeling safer and more cherished than she had ever felt in her life. Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow that piled deep around the cabin. Millicent learned to love the quiet beauty of the season, the way the world seemed muffled and peaceful beneath its white blanket. She and Isaac spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading aloud from the few books Isaac owned. They made love frequently, unable to get enough of each other, and on the coldest nights, they would stay in bed until noon, wrapped in each other's warmth. Millicent's kindness continued to manifest in small ways. She knitted socks for Isaac and made him a new winter coat from a bearskin he had tanned the previous year. She left food out for the animals that struggled to find nourishment in the deep snow. She even befriended a family of raccoons that denned near the cabin, feeding them scraps and earning Isaac's amused exasperation. "You would adopt every creature in these mountains if I let you," he teased one morning, watching her scatter seeds for the birds. "Perhaps," Millicent agreed with a smile, "but you knew what you were getting when you married me." "I did," Isaac said, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head, "and I would not change a single thing about you." Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and new growth. Millicent planted a garden near the cabin, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the mountain soil. She had never gardened before, but she learned through trial and error, and by summer they had fresh produce to supplement the meat Isaac hunted and the fish they caught from the stream. In July, Millicent realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses twice and had been feeling queasy in the mornings. When she told Isaac, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. He became even more protective than before, insisting she rest frequently and refusing to let her do any heavy work. "Isaac, I am pregnant, not broken," Millicent protested when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry to the stream. "I know, but I worry," he admitted. "You and this child are everything to me. I could not bear it if something happened to either of you." Millicent softened, understanding the fear beneath his words. "Nothing will happen," she promised. "I am healthy and strong, and so is our baby." As her belly swelled with their growing child, Isaac became fascinated by the changes in her body. He would lay his large hand on her stomach and talk to the baby, telling it stories about the mountains and promising to teach it everything he knew. When the baby kicked for the first time, Isaac's face lit up with wonder, and Millicent fell in love with him all over again. In late winter of 1874, Millicent went into labor. The nearest doctor was too far away to reach in time, so Isaac delivered their child himself, his hands remarkably steady despite his terror. The baby came into the world squalling and healthy, a boy with a thick head of dark hair and his father's strong features. They named him James after Isaac's father, and Isaac cradled his son in his massive arms with such gentleness that Millicent wept. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered, tears running down his own weathered cheeks. "Thank you, Millicent. Thank you for this gift." James proved to be a happy, healthy baby who thrived in the mountain air. Millicent devoted herself to motherhood with the same kindness she showed to everything else, and Isaac was a doting father who spent hours playing with his son and teaching him about the world around them. When James was 6 months old, they made a trip down to Abilene so Millicent could show off her family. The town had changed little, and Mr. Hutchins welcomed them warmly, declaring that married life clearly agreed with Millicent. She glowed with happiness, and Isaac stayed close by her side, one hand always resting protectively on her back or shoulder. They visited for a week, and Millicent helped out at the general store, showing Mr. Hutchins the new bookkeeping system she had devised. But by the end of the week, she was ready to return to the mountains. Abilene had been a stepping stone, but the mountains were her home now, and she missed them with an ache that surprised her. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growing love. James grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to track and hunt and respect the wilderness. When he was 3, Millicent gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, a delicate girl with her mother's auburn hair and kind heart. 2 years later came another son, William, who had his father's size and his mother's gentle nature. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Isaac building additional rooms and a larger fireplace. Millicent's garden flourished, and she learned to preserve food for the long winters. She taught her children to read and write, using the small collection of books that grew each time they visited Abilene. Through it all, Isaac never stopped looking at Millicent with wonder, never stopped marveling at the kindness that seemed to radiate from her very being. He watched her nurse injured animals back to health, watched her teach their children compassion and empathy, watched her extend grace and understanding even when it would have been easier to harden her heart. One evening, when they had been married 10 years, Isaac and Millicent sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were asleep inside, and the world was quiet except for the song of the stream and the whisper of wind through the pines. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked suddenly. "Leaving Abilene, coming to live in these mountains with me?" Millicent turned to look at her husband, taking in the silver that had begun to thread through his dark hair, the lines that time and weather had etched into his face, the love that still burned bright in his eyes. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment, even though life here is hard. Even though you have to work every day just to survive, even though you are isolated from other people." Millicent took his hand, holding it tight. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met? You said my kindness was a strength, not a weakness. No one had ever told me that before, Isaac. Everyone in my life had tried to make me harder, colder, less compassionate. But you saw the truth. You saw that kindness takes courage, that it is a choice I make every day, and you valued it." Isaac raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Your kindness saved me," he said quietly. "I was so lonely before you came, so lost. I thought I wanted isolation, but I was just afraid of being hurt again. You taught me that love is worth the risk, that opening your heart is not weakness but the greatest strength of all." Millicent leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the cabin, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. The mountains rose around them, protective and eternal, and Millicent thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had fled Philadelphia to escape a loveless marriage, had built a life in Abilene only to be told again and again that her nature was her downfall. But then, a mountain man had looked at her with storm-gray eyes and seen not weakness but strength, had valued the very qualities everyone else wanted her to change. He had offered her a chance at real love, at a life built on mutual respect and genuine affection, and she had been brave enough to take it. The years continued to unfold in the mountains. James grew into a strong young man who had his father's skill in the wilderness and his mother's compassion. At 19, he fell in love with a girl from a neighboring settlement and brought her home to meet his parents. Sarah was a sweet, hard-working young woman, and Millicent welcomed her with open arms, helping to plan a wedding that took place in the clearing where the cabin stood. Rose, at 16, had become a skilled healer, learning from her mother how to tend wounds and treat illness with herbs gathered from the mountains. She had her mother's gift for comforting the suffering, and people from neighboring settlements began to seek her out when they needed medical help. William, 14, was quieter than his siblings but no less devoted to his family. He loved books and learning, and Millicent spent hours teaching him everything she knew, wishing she had more resources to offer him. In the autumn of 1884, when Millicent was 33 and Isaac 42, they sat together by the fire as they had done countless times before. The children were all occupied with their own pursuits, and the cabin was peaceful. "I have been thinking," Isaac said, setting down the harness he had been mending. "William needs more education than we can give him here, and Rose could benefit from formal medical training. Perhaps it is time to consider moving closer to a town, at least for a few years." Millicent looked up from her knitting in surprise. "You would leave the mountains, after all these years?" "I would do anything for our family," Isaac said simply. "The mountains will always be here, but our children need opportunities we cannot provide in isolation." They discussed it long into the night, weighing the pros and cons. Eventually, they decided to compromise. They would keep the mountain cabin but build a house in a settlement about a day's ride away. They could spend summers in the mountains and winters in the settlement, giving the children access to schools and other resources while maintaining their connection to the wilderness they all loved. The following spring, they began construction on a house in a settlement called Pinewood. It was larger than the mountain cabin, with enough room for their growing family and the grandchildren that would surely come. Millicent threw herself into making it a home, and Isaac worked tirelessly to ensure it was solid and safe. William enrolled in the settlement school and thrived, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Rose apprenticed herself to the settlement's doctor, an elderly man who was grateful to have such an eager student. James and Sarah lived in the mountain cabin, managing it when Isaac and Millicent were in Pinewood. Life in Pinewood brought new challenges. Some of the settlement's residents were suspicious of outsiders, and there were those who took advantage of Millicent's generous nature. She extended credit to families who never paid it back, gave away food to people who were perfectly capable of providing for themselves, and spent hours nursing the sick, even when they showed no gratitude. Isaac watched all of this with growing concern. One evening, after Millicent had given away the last of their winter stores to a family who claimed to be destitute, he gently confronted her. "You have to be more careful," he said. "People will take advantage of your kindness." "I know," Millicent said quietly. "I know that family probably lied to me. But what if they did not? What if they truly needed help and I turned them away? I would rather be taken advantage of 100 times than refuse help to someone who genuinely needs it." Isaac pulled her into his arms. "Your heart is so big," he murmured. "I just worry about you. I know you do, but you have never asked me to be anyone but who I am. Please do not start now." "I would never ask you to change," Isaac assured her. "I fell in love with your kindness and I will defend it until my dying day. I just wish the world was worthy of you." Millicent smiled against his chest. "The world is exactly as it should be, full of beauty and cruelty, kindness and hardship. And I choose to meet it with compassion, not because I am naive, but because I believe that is how things get better." In Pinewood, Millicent became known as the woman who would help anyone who asked. She organized food drives for struggling families, taught reading to adults who had never learned, and opened her home to travelers who needed shelter. Some people whispered that she was foolish, that she was being used, but others recognized the genuine good she was doing and began to help her efforts. Isaac supported her in everything, his massive presence at her side a deterrent to anyone who might think to hurt her. He had aged gracefully into his 40s, his hair now more silver than dark, but he was still powerful and capable, and everyone in Pinewood knew that to cross Millicent Palmer was to invoke the wrath of her mountain man husband. Rose grew into a skilled healer who shared her mother's compassion and her father's quiet strength. She married a young rancher named Thomas, and they built a life in Pinewood, giving Millicent and Isaac their first grandchildren, twin girls named Emma and Elizabeth. William earned a scholarship to a university in the East, making Millicent cry with pride. He promised to return after his education, determined to bring his knowledge back to help his community. James and Sarah had 3 children in the mountain cabin, raising them in the same wilderness that had shaped James. Every summer, the entire extended family gathered at the mountain cabin for weeks of fishing, hunting, storytelling, and laughter. As Millicent approached her 40th birthday in 1891, she took stock of her life. She had been married to Isaac for 17 years, had raised 3 children who had become remarkable adults, and had built a community in Pinewood that valued compassion and mutual aid. She had never become wealthy, never achieved fame or recognition beyond her small corner of the world, but she had something far more valuable: love, purpose, and the knowledge that she had stayed true to herself. One crisp autumn evening, As she and Isaac walked hand in hand through the streets of Pinewood, they encountered a young woman sitting on a bench crying. Millicent immediately approached her, and through sobs, the woman explained that she had come west hoping to start a new life, but had lost all her money to a con man. She had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Without hesitation, Millicent invited the woman to stay with them until she could get on her feet. Isaac said nothing, simply nodding his agreement. Later, as they lay in bed, he chuckled softly. "What is funny?" Millicent asked. "I was just thinking about the day we met, when you threw yourself in front of that child. You have not changed at all, and I thank God for it every day." Millicent rolled over to face him, running her fingers through his silver hair. "You made it possible for me to be who I am. In Philadelphia, in Abilene, everyone wanted me to be smaller, harder, less. But you celebrated my kindness, protected it, helped it flourish. How could I not love you with everything I am?" Isaac kissed her tenderly. "I am the lucky one, Millicent Palmer. You took a lonely, bitter man and taught him how to live again, how to love again. You gave me a family and a purpose. Every day with you has been a gift." They held each other close, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, who had built a life based on mutual respect, deep love, and shared values. The young woman Millicent had taken in, whose name was Clara, stayed with them for 3 months. During that time, Millicent helped her find work at the general store and a small room to rent. Clara never forgot the kindness shown to her, and years later, when she had married and prospered, she became one of Pinewood's most generous philanthropists, always crediting Millicent Palmer as her inspiration. William returned from university with a degree in education and opened a school in Pinewood, offering classes to children and adults alike. He married a teacher he had met in the East, a brilliant woman named Anna who shared his passion for learning. As the years passed, Isaac and Millicent settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration and misunderstanding, but they had learned how to navigate them with honesty and grace. They knew each other so well that sometimes words were unnecessary, a glance or a touch conveying everything that needed to be said. In the summer of 1895, when Millicent was 44 and Isaac 53, they returned to the mountain cabin for what had become their annual family gathering. All 3 children were there with their spouses and children, and the clearing around the cabin rang with the laughter of grandchildren. One evening, after the children had been put to bed and the younger generation had retired, Isaac and Millicent sat alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast sky. They had been married 21 years, and Isaac looked at his wife with the same love and wonder he had felt when he first saw her. "Do you remember what I said to you the day we met?" he asked. "You said many things that day," Millicent replied with a smile. "I said your kindness was a strength, not a weakness. I have watched you live that truth every day for over 2 decades now, and I need you to know something." Millicent turned to face him, seeing the emotion in his eyes. "You were right to hold onto your kindness," Isaac continued. "You were right to refuse to let the world harden you. Look at what you have built, Millicent. Look at the lives you have touched, the good you have done. Our children are compassionate and strong because you taught them by example. The settlement of Pinewood is a better place because you live there. I am a better man because I love you." Tears streamed down Millicent's face. "I could not have done any of it without you. You protected me when I needed protection, supported me when others doubted, and loved me exactly as I am. You never tried to change me, never asked me to be less than who I am. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They sat together as the night deepened, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in sync. Around them, The mountains stood eternal and protective, the same mountains where their love had first bloomed, the same mountains that had witnessed their joys and sorrows, their triumphs and challenges. Inside the cabin, their grandchildren slept peacefully, watched over by their parents. In Pinewood, their house stood ready for their return, part of a community they had helped shape and strengthen. And in their hearts, they carried the knowledge that they had lived fully and well, that they had built something meaningful that would outlast them. As the years continued to pass, Isaac and Millicent grew older together. Isaac's hair turned completely white, and his movements became slower, though he remained strong. Millicent developed silver streaks in her auburn hair and laugh lines around her eyes, marks of a life filled with joy. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1899, with a gathering of friends and family that filled their Pinewood house to bursting. James gave a speech about his parents' enduring love. Rose presented them with a quilt she had made depicting scenes from their life together, and William read a poem he had written in their honor. But the most touching moment came when their oldest granddaughter, Emma, now a young woman of 15, stood to speak. "Grandma Millicent," she said, her voice clear and strong, "you have taught me that kindness is not weakness but courage. You have shown me that helping others is not foolishness but wisdom. Because of you, I know that I can be soft and strong at the same time, that compassion and strength are not opposites but partners. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Millicent wept openly, and Isaac held her close, his own eyes wet with tears. This was their legacy, not wealth or status, but the values they had passed down to the next generation, the love they had demonstrated through their words and actions. In the spring of 1902, Isaac began to experience pain in his chest. The doctor in Pinewood examined him and delivered grave news. His heart was failing. There was no treatment, nothing to be done except to make him comfortable and wait for the inevitable. Millicent refused to accept it at first, pouring all her energy into caring for Isaac, trying every herbal remedy she knew, praying with a desperation she had never felt before. But Isaac, always practical, accepted his fate with quiet grace. "I have had a good life," he told Millicent one evening as they sat together in their bedroom. "I have loved and been loved, raised a family, made a difference. Not many men can say that." "You cannot leave me," Millicent whispered, her voice breaking. "I need you." Isaac cupped her face in his hands, still large and strong despite his illness. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, Millicent Palmer. You do not need me, but I hope you will always remember that I loved you, that my greatest honor was being your husband." "Do not talk like that," Millicent said fiercely. "You are going to recover, you have to." But Isaac did not recover. In late June, surrounded by his wife and children, he slipped peacefully away. His last words were for Millicent. "Thank you for saving me." Millicent's grief was profound and overwhelming. For weeks, she could barely eat or sleep, and her children worried that she would follow their father into death. But gradually, supported by the love of her family and the community she had built, Millicent began to heal. She threw herself into helping others, finding solace in service. She worked at the school William had founded, taught healing to young women interested in medicine, and continued to open her home to those in need. Her kindness, the very quality that had defined her entire life, became her salvation in the darkest time. 1 year after Isaac's death, Millicent made a pilgrimage to the mountain cabin. James had maintained it carefully, and it looked much as it had when she and Isaac first lived there. She walked through the rooms, touching surfaces that Isaac had built, remembering the life they had shared. That night, she sat on the porch where they had spent so many evenings, and she spoke aloud to Isaac, telling him about the grandchildren he was missing, about the changes in Pinewood. about how much she missed him. And in the whisper of the wind through the pines, in the song of the stream, she felt his presence, felt his love surrounding her still. Millicent lived for another 15 years after Isaac's death, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 66 in 1917. In those years, she saw her grandchildren grow into adults, met her great-grandchildren, and continued to be a force for good in Pinewood and the surrounding areas. At her funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Person after person stood to speak of her kindness, her generosity, her unwavering compassion. They spoke of meals she had provided, wounds she had healed, comfort she had offered, and love she had freely given. Emma, now a respected teacher herself, gave the final eulogy. She spoke of her grandmother's courage, of the choice to remain soft in a hard world, of the strength it took to be kind when kindness was dismissed as weakness. "My grandmother was told throughout her life that her kindness was her weakness," Emma said, her voice ringing through the church. But my grandfather knew better. He recognized that her kindness was her greatest strength, and he loved her for it. Together, they built a legacy of compassion and love that continues to shape our community. We honor her best by following her example, by choosing kindness even when it is difficult, by seeing strength in gentleness and courage in compassion. Millicent was buried next to Isaac on a hill overlooking the mountains they had both loved. On their shared headstone, their children had inscribed simple words. She was kind. He was strong. Together they were everything. Years later, when the story of Isaac and Millicent Palmer was told to the children of Pinewood, it became a tale of true love found against all odds, of a woman who refused to let the world change her nature, and a man who loved her for it. It became a reminder that kindness is not weakness, that compassion requires courage, and that the greatest strength is the ability to remain true to yourself even when everyone tells you to change. The mountain cabin still stands, maintained now by the Palmer family as a reminder of their heritage. And on warm summer evenings, when the wind whispers through the pines and the stream sings its eternal song, people swear they can feel the presence of Isaac and Millicent, their love as enduring as the mountains themselves, their legacy living on in every act of kindness, in every choice to help rather than harden, in every heart that chooses compassion over cruelty. Their story reminds us that love is not always loud or dramatic, but sometimes quiet and steady, built on mutual respect and shared values. It reminds us that the qualities the world dismisses as weaknesses, kindness, gentleness, compassion, are often the very things that change the world for the better. And it reminds us that finding someone who sees and values our true nature, who celebrates rather than criticizes our deepest qualities, is the greatest blessing life can offer. In the end, Millicent Graham had been told her kindness was a weakness by everyone from her parents to the townspeople of Abilene. But Isaac Palmer saw the truth. Her kindness was the strength he admired, the quality that drew him to her and kept him devoted for the rest of his days. And in that recognition, in that acceptance and celebration of who she truly was, Millicent found not just love but the freedom to be fully herself, to live authentically and completely, to make a difference in the world not despite her kindness, but because of it. Their love story became a testament to the power of acceptance, the beauty of seeing and being seen, and the profound truth that our supposed weaknesses are often our greatest strengths, if only we can find someone who recognizes them as such.